Okay, back in the 70s, and before I lived in Massachusetts, and I was a guitar player. I did my own repair for what I could do, but when I needed help, I would go up to Boston, downtown. There was a little tiny shop run by a man named Eddie Murray, and I would have him fix whatever I couldn't fix. One summer, when I was in my second year of college, he asked me if I would come to work for him for the summer. Well, I thought this was a delightful idea, so I did. And at the end of the summer, I decided I'd stay on for the year since Eddie asked me to. Of course, my parents were not happy about this because they were worried I wouldn't go back to college, but I eventually did. But while I was working for Eddie, the store was moved over to be part of EU Wurlitzer's, which was a well-known music store at the bottom of Newbury Street. And it was the place where everybody came, anybody that was playing in town and whatnot. So as I worked there, I realized that it would be nice to develop a specialty since there were only 3 of us in the shop. And I wanted to have something unique to me, and I decided to learn how to do inlay. So the first inlay I did is on my own guitar, which is a small Dragonfly. And Eddie stood over my shoulder the whole time telling me I was going to ruin my guitar. But when I was finished, he asked me to inlay a guitar of his, which he was constructing. It was a replica of a Les Paul. And he wanted a naked lady. So I inlaid a naked lady on the fingerboard. That guitar hung up in the main store for probably a decade. And many, many people saw it. And one time, Tom Rush came upstairs. It was the first time I met him, and he was having Eddie do some work on one of his instruments. And he asked me if I would do a naked lady for him. And I said, well, I don't want to repeat the same thing. Let's come up with something different. And I don't remember if it was me or Tom came up with the idea of having a snake curling around the lady's body. So apparently Tom refers to the naked lady with the snake around it as a biblical theme, but I don't recollect that when we were picking out that design and designing to do it. So I'll have to talk to him and see what that's all about. That was my third inlay, and it became my most famous one because Tom carried it with him everywhere. Posters were made of him holding it, and it became an iconic symbol for Tom with his work. So there are many moments in a person's lives that you remember things really intensely. And with music, I remember a number of things. The very first one was being 8 or 9 and hearing Stevie Wonder play on my little transistor radio. Another time I was writing, this is here in Massachusetts, I was writing a paper for high school, and I'm sitting on the floor in front of my parents' big collection of Encyclopedia Britannica, and I'm listening to the radio. My parents have gone to bed, it's night, and a song comes on the radio that just stopped me in my tracks. And I'm listening to this mellifluous voice singing a song called Urge for Going. This was my first encounter with Tom's singing and his playing. It was also my first time I ever heard a song by Joni Mitchell. And that became very much imprinted on my life. And so I enjoyed Tom's singing and playing ever since. This is one of the posters that was done for Symphony Hall. I'm not sure the year, but it had to be back in the 70s. And he's holding the guitar, as many photographs he has. So after I did Tom's, and I had this other guitar, the second one, hanging down in the store, I had lots of people come in and ask for inlays. And we had many people that were well known as well as just local people. One of the people was Jay Giles, who I got to know that band fairly well, and I inlaid Jay's name, Jay Giles, on his fingerboard, and we did purfling on that guitar also. Much later, I did a design for Joe Perry of Aerosmith, which had a naked lady in it too. It was a naked girl riding a leopard. It never got done because of stuff that was happening in his life, but I still have the tracing downstairs in a portfolio somewhere. So as I went about doing inlay, I really had a great time doing it. And I did a lot of small specialty things for people in and around Boston. And then I got interested in antique inlay. My parents ran an antique shop, so I had a very strong interest in that. And I also ended up repairing antiques that had inlay, like in ivory. I did a cased clock that had inlay all over it in ivory and tortoiseshell, and parts of it were missing. And what I would do for inlaying ivory, since I couldn't buy slabs of ivory like I could with abalone and mother of pearl, I would look for old piano keys. And that's what I would use. They were the right thickness, and I would use that to use for inlay that required ivory. And on that particular clock, I also couldn't get tortoiseshell to replace the missing pieces of real tortoiseshell. So I just went up to my old boss, Eddie, and said, Eddie, can you show me some of that pickguard material we used to use that looks like tortoiseshell? And that's what I ended up using on this particular clock casing. But then I took it a step further. I had found this little guitar at a flea market. It was in pieces, and I bought it for $5 and fixed it up, repaired it, did all the lacquering on it, put all the parts back together. And I wanted to do an inlay on it that was representative of the time it came from, since it was an antique. So I went to the Museum of Arts to look at their musical instruments, their antique ones, and I met the curator, and she invited me to go in the basement to see the collection that was not on view. So I got to see all these incredibly beautifully inlaid antique instruments, and that inspired me. And what I ended up doing on the little antique guitar was a full length, because this was very common in the old days. And it has a combination of mother pearl, abalone, and also wood. I used wood veneer too, because that was very commonly used in antique instruments. And it came out with a nice, sweet little sound, and I still have it. And by the way, when you do inlay, you have to remove the frets before you can start carving the wood and putting the inlay in. Cutting, it requires a great deal of precision on it. And I have matching tracing so that I can make sure the tracing for the abalone matches the cutout pattern on the fingerboard. And it has to fit pretty closely, but there are always little tiny gaps. And on a rosewood fingerboard, I would save the dust from carving it out and mix it with a certain kind of epoxy to fill in the edges. And on ebony fingerboards, I had a mixture, a powder that was black that I could put in, and that would fill in the tiny little gaps around the pieces of shell. Now, I also played instruments, and I was interested in electric guitar and bass and so forth, and I really liked these little SGs. And this particular one, I had two of these. It was made for a year and a half around 1961, and it actually had Les Paul on the headstock originally. I took it off here. But after that, they called them the SG, which means standard guitar. But I like this because it was a good size for me. I had a big Les Paul too, but this is my favorite. So when I got this one, it was in pieces again. Client brought it in, and he wanted the old pickups, but he gave me the guitar body. So I replaced all the pickups and the fingerboard and all the electronics and stuff. I put purfling around the whole outside of the fingerboard and headstock. And I never got around to inlaying the fingerboard, but this is one of my later inlays that has an eagle. And every feather is separate. There are something like 32 or 34 pieces of inlay that were all specifically matched to look like feathers. Then I engrave it afterwards with an engraving tool, and you fill it with a black wax to make the engraving show up. So another thing I did for this guitar, and it's off right now because I'm trying to polish it, is I got a piece of heavy brass, and it fits right over the pickups and so forth with the classic fire kind of look on it. And it took me 2 days to cut this out because it was such a heavy piece of brass. It needs to be polished right now, which is why it's off the guitar. But it really looks snazzy when it's on. So my degree when I graduated was in visual design, and I fell into a business I never expected, and I was working primarily for interior designers and sometimes architects. And I would go into people's homes and paint specialty things, and I learned all sorts of paint techniques, from simple wall glazes to making my own stencils, painting things on the wall, abstract, but rarely on canvas. It was always on wall, floors, ceilings, and furniture. Behind me are two panels that I originally painted for myself. My specialty is trompe-l'oeil, and that is a French word that means fool the eye. And I would paint things so that they looked like they were actually there, but it was actually a painting. The ones behind me are a hanging scroll, which is not there, it's all painted, and it's what they call an inrow. It's a small medicine box, was hanging where there was a doorknob, a real doorknob, because these were both on doors. And this one is a Japanese samisen, which is an instrument, musical instrument, with the fan hanging next to it. And all of the hinges are all painted, and when it was on the door, it looked like it was attached by metal nailed frame, but it's all painted. So many years ago, another thing I became interested in was the art of bonsai. And so these are small trees that are pruned carefully, both roots and top, and styled to live in a pot. This is a pine tree I bought back in 1988 or thereabouts. It's gone through many changes. I cut off 2/3 of it and kept only 2 branches and restyled it. This is the original first branch on the big tree, and this entire top was the back branch on the original tree, which was quite tall. I turned the whole tree around, and it took me 15 years or so to pull up this back branch and to turn it into small layers to make a new top for it. But in cutting it down, the trunk looks much fatter, whereas when it's a tall tree, proportionally, the trunk would look smaller. And the pots are very special. We find pots in Europe, Japan. There are many good potters here in the United States. This one happened to come from Europe. And I have a much too large collection, like most of us, and I've reduced quite a bit. But I have native trees I used to collect up in the mountains, and I have trees that I started from seedling. And this one was imported from Japan. So I do have some imports too. But it's a very creative art. It falls right in line with my love of painting and my love of doing inlay and other artistic pursuits. So I'm fortunate in my life that I've had many interests, and it has taken me through music, inlay, my business in painting art with the trompe-l'oeil and other things, and then my interest in plants and the art of bonsai. I don't know what I'll go do from here on, but there should be something else waiting for me down the road.